We're going to simplify and write your answer with only positive exponents. So the first thing you want to notice is there are parentheses. So we're going to work inside the parentheses first. And the next thing I notice is there are negative exponents inside the parentheses. Whenever that happens, you want a fraction. So the rule is, we're starting with the numerator, and again, we're working inside the parentheses first. The rule is anything that doesn't have an exponent or that has a positive exponent stays. So the only thing we're going to move is a negative exponent. If it's in the denominator, we move it to the numerator. So if it's in the bottom, we move it to the top. If it's in the top, we move it to the bottom. So let's just start one thing at a time. The 3 doesn't have an exponent, so it stays where it's at. And that exponent there is technically a 1. If there is no exponent, it's assumed to be a 1, and I'll just write it because we're going to need it in a moment. The y has a positive exponent, so leave it where it is. In the denominator, the z has a negative exponent. Because it has a negative exponent, you have to move it. So since it's on the bottom, I'm going to move it to the top. Now that I have gotten rid of the negative exponents inside the parentheses, and as you notice at this point, we don't have anything in the denominator. Oops, sorry about that. Did not plan on that happening. Just a second. At this point, we don't have anything in the denominator, so we're not going to have a fraction for an answer, so I'll get rid of the fraction bar at this point. Okay, now I see on the outside an exponent of -2. I'm not going to deal with the negative. I'm going to leave it alone, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But I am going to use the exponent 2 and distribute it to get rid of the parentheses. So for my 3, 1 times 2 is 2. For the y, 2 times 5 is 10. And for the z, 2 times 3 is 6. Now, because you had a negative exponent outside of the parentheses, that means flip the final answer. So my final answer wasn't a fraction, but I'm going to make it a fraction by putting a 1 underneath because I need to flip that. And you literally flip the entire thing. So you're going to switch these. My final answer is going to be 1 over 3 squared is the same as 3 times 3, which is 9. And I have y to the 10th and z to the 6th. So that's the final answer. Okay, on the next one again, whenever you have negative exponents, you want to have a fraction bar if you have negatives inside the parentheses. The 2 doesn't have an exponent, so that stays where it's at. And since it doesn't have an exponent, put a 1. The b has a negative exponent, so I'm going to move it to the bottom. When you do that, that takes the negative sign away. The c has a positive exponent, so it stays right where it's at. Now, saving the negative exponent on the outside for last, saving the negative sign for last, I'm going to distribute the 4. So in my numerator, 2 to the 4th power, and c, 4 times 2 is 8. Denominator for my b, 4 times 3 is 12. Now I figure out the numerical part. 2 to the 4th means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. It is literally 2 multiplying itself 4 times. So that's 4, 8, 16. 16 c to the 8th over b to the 12th. However, because the original problem had a negative exponent outside of parentheses, you flip the fraction. So b over 12 is going to be the numerator, 16c to the 8th is the denominator, and now it's finished. The next one, simplify inside the parentheses first. The 4 doesn't have an exponent, so it stays where it's at, and put a 1 as an exponent. The x has a positive exponent, so it stays where it's at. In the denominator, the y has a negative exponent, so instead of the bottom, you're going to move it to the top and take the negative sign away. Now we still want a fraction here, so I'm going to put a 1 because it has a negative exponent on the outside. Okay, so now I'm going to save the negative part for last and just do the 3. So for my 4, 3 times 1 is 3. For my x, 3 times 4 is 12. And for my y, 3 times 2 is 6. The 1 has an exponent of 1. And I just went ahead and put that 1 there because I know that I'm going to flip it in a minute. So 1 times 3 is 3. Okay, so I'm going to figure out the numerical part first. 4 cubed is 4 times 4 times 4, which is 64. X to the 12th, y to the 6th. 1 cubed is 1 times 1 times 1, which is 1. But because the original problem had a negative exponent on the outside of parentheses, we flip the fraction. So I'm going to have 1 over 64, x to the 12th, y to the 6th.